Oh my God. Oh my God.
For today's Bigfoot Encounter episode, we examine the worst farmer and Bigfoot encounters ever recorded. From a farmer enduring 2 months of escalating Bigfoot harassment as it stalks his property, to a man who finally traps Bigfoot after months of stolen livestock, unaware of the mistake he just made. Harlan claimed he caught it, Bigfoot, taking his sheep. The Sasquatch crossed fences like they weren't there, dismantled traps without triggering them, and watched from the tree line, always just out of reach. When he finally raised his rifle and fired, he realized too late. Some things in the forest don't flinch at bullets. They decide who becomes prey. Harlan Briggs stepped out into the early morning chill. The pasture was quiet, too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He counted the sheep again, methodical, slow, every animal a familiar weight of sound and movement. One sheep was gone. Then a sudden snap of a branch behind him froze his blood. Heart hammering, he swung the flashlight toward the sound. Something massive had moved through the trees, brushing leaves, breaking twigs. Not the wind, not a deer. The soft ground from overnight rain revealed an imprint that made him step back in shock. Footprints, gigantic and bipedal, heels sunk deep, toes splayed, stretching from the pen toward the tree line. They curved deliberately around rocks and twigs, avoiding sound like a predator gliding through shadows, and one print stopped just short of the trees, as if pausing to watch him. He assumed a bear at first, but the stride was too long, too purposeful. Bears didn't move with calculated silence or a sense of awareness. Something intelligent had passed here, and it was still watching him. He measured one with his boot. 18 inches at least. He'd seen bears, elk, and the occasional wandering moose, but nothing left footprints like this. The mud was pressed firm, edges smeared slightly by rain, yet unmistakable. Whoever, or whatever, had passed had weight and height beyond normal. How heavy did something have to be to sink the earth this deep and still move without noise? He moved toward the tree line, flashlight sweeping across the dark undergrowth, when a shape shifted between the trunks. It was massive, broad-shouldered, standing upright, and Harlan froze. At first, the dim outline looked like a bear, but then it took a step that made his gut tighten. The legs swung with a fluid, precise motion, no lumbering stumble, no panicked retreat. Every movement radiated intelligence and a chilling awareness that it was watching him. The air smelled heavier near the forest, something musky, primal, mixing with the faint odor of pine and decaying leaves. Harlan's pulse quickened. He crouched, holding the flashlight low, peering between shadows. The creature didn't move again, didn't even look at him, or maybe it did, but he couldn't tell in the failing light. That evening he counted the sheep again. The remaining animals were restless. A lamb shuffled nervously, head low, ears swiveling. Harlan's heart sank when he noticed another animal gone, a smaller calf this time. The drag marks led to the forest, cutting through the undergrowth like a measured path. Why take it again so soon unless it wanted him to notice? He inspected the edges of the trees. It was at this moment that vocalizations reached him. Low, brief, controlled sounds from the trees. A sequence of short calls, almost conversational, echoing briefly and stopping. Harlan stiffened, scanning the darkness with his flashlight. The livestock clustered near the pen's center, uneasy. The sounds ceased before he could identify a source. He realized this presence wasn't wandering aimlessly. It was aware, deliberate. Were those calls meant for others, or meant for him to hear? He moved closer to the forest again. The tracks curved around rocks and fallen logs, avoiding open patches where moonlight touched the ground. The pathway was intelligent. Someone, or something, had mapped it. Harlan's pulse hammered in his chest. The predator was stronger than any bear, faster than any elk, and more cunning than any animal he'd encountered. By full nightfall, he had checked the pens 3 times. The remaining sheep and calf were huddled tightly, eyes reflecting the dim light of the barn. But his stomach sank as he counted again. 4 calves were missing this time. The quiet panic in the animals, The absence of their small bleats hit him like a punch. His hands shook, gripping the flashlight tighter as dread settled in his chest. He stayed outside, flashlight low, scanning shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made him flinch. A movement caught his eye, low in the brush. Something shifted, tall, upright, and then vanished into the darkness before he could get a clear view. Harlan stood perfectly still, listening. The breathing he finally noticed was deep, steady, not like a cow or sheep. Closer than the tracks alone suggested, heavier. His muscles tensed as he realized the inevitable. The next disappearance wouldn't be random. Whoever was taking his livestock was coming back, intentionally, measuring him. The intelligence behind those tracks, the controlled movements, the vocalizations, they all meant it understood its environment and it understood him. If it was studying him, how long before it decided to act? By dawn, another sheep and 3 calves had disappeared. The drag marks led straight toward the tree line, meticulous, deliberate, avoiding noisy brush and loose ground. The prints were larger now, sharper, overlapping previous tracks. He swallowed hard, realizing the creature was learning, adapting, always one step ahead. Harlan crouched again, flashlight sweeping the area. For a split second, he caught a dark shape moving upright through the trees, a calf clutched in its arms. The beam hit it for only a heartbeat, too fast to see details, too sudden for him to process. The figure moved with impossible speed. In barely seconds, the calf thudded to the ground as the creature released it, then disappeared into the shadows. Harlan's pulse hammered. The creature was gone before he could even register its size, its face, or the full scope of its movement. Only the bleating of the calf and the rustle of leaves betrayed what had just happened. Harlan tightened the chains on the gates and reinforced the corner. Morning light broke over the field, but the tension did not lift. He knew he was facing something beyond comprehension, something immense and intelligent, and it was only just beginning. If daylight couldn't drive it away, what chance did darkness leave him? Harlan Briggs moved with deliberate precision that morning, selecting his tools with careful consideration. Wire snares were anchored deep into the mud and leaf litter, heavy-duty ropes stacked to prevent snapping, tripwires threaded taut and silent between the tree trunks. Pitfalls were disguised with brush and baited with hay or the remnants of the livestock he could spare. Each trap was placed along the tracks he had studied for days, following the curves, avoiding noisy ground, tracing paths chosen with almost unnatural care. Every movement of the predator had been calculated, and Harlan knew his response had to be just as precise. When night fell fully, he made his rounds again. One by one, he inspected each trap. At first glance, nothing seemed disturbed. Then he noticed subtle shifts. The snares no longer held tension. The tripwires sagged slightly, the cans empty of gravel. Pitfalls remained intact, but the stones had been moved aside and stacked neatly. The bait was gone, every trap dismantled with surgical precision. Harlan knelt beside a snare, pressing his fingers into the mud. Large, wide prints marred the soil, not human, too long and thick. Fingertips ending in pads no man could have. The creature had not avoided the traps. It had studied them, examined them, removed every obstacle without panic or error. If it understood his traps this well, what else did it understand about him? At this time, Harlan mentioned that frustration burned and rage clawed at him, but the intelligence behind the action forced him to curb his impulse. He moved to reinforce the lines, adding deadfalls and extra loops, setting each with renewed care. By the time the last trap was in place, night had deepened and the forest pressed in, shadows folding into darkness. Every sense screamed alert. He knew it was coming. He settled near the barn, rifle across his lap, flashlight low but sweeping the forest edge. The air smelled of wet earth, moss, and the faint trace of something musky that had lingered since morning. Was he guarding the livestock, or had he already become the focal point of the hunt? After an hour, the same footfalls approached. Nothing was visible yet, but he could feel the pressure of a presence brushing at the edge of his perception. Another hour passed when rocks started falling on the ground near the traps, dislodging leaves and spraying mud, but none triggered the mechanisms. Harlan flinched each time, swinging the flashlight toward the source, but finding nothing. Then the vocalizations returned. A brief whoop, a sequence of clicks, then silence. He could almost feel the creature assessing him, evaluating how he responded to each sound, each visual cue. Was this a warning meant to drive him away, or an invitation to escalate? Harlan stayed awake all night. He moved only when necessary, adjusting the flashlight or rifle. Every time he thought he saw movement, his heart leapt, pulse screaming in his ears. Rocks struck closer now, but not aimed to hit, only to test and provoke. How long could he endure being measured like prey before he made a fatal mistake? By first light, he checked the traps again. The snares lay open, wires untwisted. Tripwires were slack, cans empty, stones removed and stacked deliberately. The pitfalls remained untouched, and their bait was gone. This time, he didn't bother with traps anymore. Instead, he spent the day preparing for a direct confrontation. He cleaned the rifle, loaded extra magazines, positioned himself where he had clear sight lines across the pasture. If the Sasquatch returned tonight, he would not hesitate. There would be no more circling, no more silent assessments in the dark. Whatever this had been, warning, test, or claim, he understood now that it was over. One way or another, he would end it. But was resolve enough against something that had already outthought him? Dusk came slowly, the light fading in gradual stages that turned the forest from green to gray to black. He sat on the porch with the rifle across his knees, watching the tree line. The floodlights came on automatically as darkness settled, illuminating the pasture in harsh white light. Beyond their reach, the forest was a wall of shadow. The cattle were restless, moving in tight circles near the barn, refusing to settle. He watched them carefully, knowing their behavior would signal the creature's approach before he saw anything himself. They had better instincts than he did. They knew when something was wrong. Around midnight, the animals suddenly bunched together, pressing against the barn wall. Their heads turned toward the northeast corner of the pasture, ears forward, bodies tense. He stood slowly, rifle ready, and followed their gaze. What had drawn every instinct in the pasture to a single point? Movement crossed the edge of the field. The floodlight caught it fully. No shadows, no obscured angles, just clear illumination of something that shouldn't exist. He aimed the rifle toward the tree line, flashlight scanning, and then he saw it. A massive shape detached from the tree line, moving upright, long limbs swinging with controlled force. Its chest was broad, muscled, torso thick and heavy, shoulders knotted like cables of rope. Fur dark and matted clung to it, streaked with mud. It was enormous, nearly 10 feet tall. Its arms hung low, fingers long, the hands capable of crushing objects with ease. Eyes glimmered faintly, intelligent and calculating, fixed directly on him. Was he being sized up as a threat, or as a problem to be removed? Harlan's breath caught as he realized that the creature looked similar to those Bigfoot sightings. The rifle felt suddenly insufficient, yet he raised it anyway. The creature froze for a heartbeat, almost as if it were studying him. Then it sidestepped trees, maneuvered through underbrush, maintaining a clear view of the livestock pens, aware of every obstacle. Harlan fired the rifle. The gun cracked through the morning mist. Fur burst where the bullet struck, dark hairs spraying into the light. The Sasquatch recoiled slightly, shifting behind a large pine with fluid agility, but it did not fall. Its roar followed, vibrating through the forest. He said that it didn't sound like a scream of pain. It felt more like a warning or a demonstration of power. What kind of creature absorbed gunfire and answered with authority instead of fear? Harlan fired again, stepping forward, heart pounding. Adrenaline consumed him, sharpening his focus. But the Sasquatch didn't flee. Instead, it moved with purpose, not panic. Branches snapped as it maneuvered between trees, dodging with unnatural precision. It lifted rocks from the ground and threw with deadly accuracy, impacting close enough to unbalance Harlan, but never hitting directly. Each movement was intentional, a test of his reactions. Adrenaline surged through Harlan, overriding fear, overriding reason. He had hit it twice. It was wounded, it was running. Every instinct told him to let it go, to stay in the light, to be grateful it was leaving. But something else drove him forward. Anger, frustration, the need to finish what had been started. He grabbed the flashlight and ran toward the forest, rifle ready, following the sound of the creature's retreat. The floodlights faded behind him as he crossed into the trees, darkness closing around him like water. His flashlight beam cut through the shadows, illuminating tree trunks and undergrowth in narrow slices of visibility. How far could light carry him once he abandoned safety? He could hear the creature ahead, heavy footsteps crashing through the forest, moving fast but not panicked. He followed, pushing through branches, stumbling over roots, his breath coming hard and fast. The sound of his own movement filled his ears, making it difficult to track the creature's position. He tried to track it with the flashlight, but its agility through the dense forest made it vanish at moments, only to reappear seconds later in a new position. Every motion seemed designed to provoke, to intimidate, to assert dominance without immediate attack. Harlan ducked behind a tree as another rock slammed into the ground near his feet. The vibrations rattled through his boots, teeth, and chest. He fired a third time. Again, the creature moved with purpose. It twisted around a large oak, hurled another rock, and landed with feet that pressed into the earth like pistons. Something massive landed nearby, not thrown, but dropped deliberately. The impact shook the ground, vibrating through the soil. He felt it through his body, a tremor that announced presence and power. Was this a warning meant to stop him, or a signal that the rules had changed? Either way, Harlan advanced, trying to flank it toward a clearing, forcing the creature to reveal itself more clearly. The creature anticipated movement, sidestepping subtly, testing his pace. Rocks flew again, this time clipping branches just above his head. He recalled leaves striking his face. By the time he reached the edge of the forest, the creature had led him through a series of movements that kept him off balance, never allowing him a moment to rest, to aim, to assess fully. Rocks thrown with calculated force struck near his shoulder and chest, jolting him, leaving bruises and small cuts. Every reaction he made was anticipated. Every path he tried to use was narrowed by unseen obstacles. When it finally slipped back behind the thickest trees, Harlan lowered the rifle. Harlan stood alone at the forest's edge, sweat and mud coating him, eyes locked on the shadowed tree line where the creature had vanished. He could feel every bruise, every strain, every scrape from branches and rocks. The scent of musk lingered, thick and pungent, and somewhere deep in his gut, he knew the chase was far from over. If it had let him live, what did it expect from him next? Harlan Briggs plunged further into the forest, the underbrush grabbing at his boots, branches whipping across his face and arms. Footfalls echoed behind him, heavy, measured, yet faster now, approaching from multiple angles. Harlan realized the predator was not fleeing. It was orchestrating his movement, forcing him through the forest. He tried to move quietly, but every slip, every soft crunch of leaves, every brush against a branch was noted. He could feel it, the pressure, the awareness of something massive, monitoring every detail. How do you escape something that already knows where you'll step next? Rocks began striking near him. The first clipped his shoulder, jolting him sideways, throwing him off balance. The second caught the side of his leg, pain shooting up through his thigh. He ducked instinctively, shoving through a thick cluster of ferns. The rocks came from directions he could not see, tossed with accuracy beyond human capacity. The forest itself seemed complicit, each branch and obstacle positioned to slow him. He forced his way forward, navigating around fallen logs, leaping over shallow ravines, pushing through dense clusters of saplings. Each footfall brought a new thud of distant impact, a rustle of leaves above, or the snap of a branch near his head. The creature's vocalizations punctuated the chaos, low huffs, guttural calls, short clicks, echoing through the trees. Was it coordinating the hunt, or savoring it? Harlan slipped on a moss-covered rock. The impact sent him sprawling onto wet leaves, boots sliding on mud. Pain shot along his arm as he braced against a tree trunk. Above, branches snapped sharply, as if struck by deliberate weight, falling just close enough to force him into a stumble. Footsteps that had seemed retreating transformed abruptly, closing the distance. Heavy, calculated steps landed behind and beside him, approaching faster than expected, almost flanking him. Harlan spun, scanning for the source. Nothing visible, just shadows, darkness, and the pervasive musk in the air. He realized fully. He was no longer in control. He was being hunted. If control was gone, what chance did instinct alone give him now? Another rock struck his shoulder, hard enough to jar the joint. He stumbled into a cluster of saplings, leaves whipping his face, branches slapping across his arms. He forced himself upright, eyes darting through the dim light filtering from above. Harlan's chest burned from exertion, his legs slick with mud and sweat. Yet he pressed on, forced by fear, determination, and an instinct to survive. Rocks struck again, this time from multiple directions, pinging off trunks, thudding into earth near him, close enough to draw blood from a glancing contact. Pain radiated through his arm and shoulder, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Was running still saving his life, or accelerating the end of it? The forest thickened, canopy closing, visibility dropping to a few yards. Shadows shifted unnaturally, moving with a purpose. Harlan felt the pressure of presence at every angle. He ducked under a fallen branch and froze, listening. Breathing, not his own, pressed in, deep, measured, resonating through the soil. The creature was near, yet he still could not see it. Branches snapped ahead. A low grunt echoed through the trees. Rocks tumbled from above, sliding down steep embankments, striking the earth dangerously close. He stumbled, nearly toppling, but regained balance, forcing his way toward what he hoped was an exit path. But the footsteps behind changed. They split, with some slowing, some circling back. Harlan pressed forward, ducking under another low branch. Every sense screamed danger. The vocalizations resumed, low, guttural huffs, high-pitched whistles, clicks that punctuated the chaos. He realized the creature's intelligence went beyond awareness. It was actively manipulating him, controlling the hunt, using terrain, sound, and force to dominate the encounter. How do you outthink something that has already engineered every move you make? A final rock struck near his feet, bouncing and grazing his calf. He lunged to avoid it, hard hammering, and skidded down a slope into a shallow ravine. When he looked up, shadows flitted at the edges of vision. Rocks rained with increasing frequency and accuracy, forcing him further down, deeper, leaving no clear path back. The realization hit fully. He was trapped. The predator had turned the forest itself into a weapon, guiding him with force, voice, and presence. Every movement he made, every reaction he had been anticipated. Harlan understood. He was no longer the hunter. He was prey. The Bigfoot had orchestrated every step, every stumble, every beat of adrenaline. He was inside its design, moving exactly where it wanted. Once you realize you're inside the plan, is there any way left to break it? The forest, the rocks, the vocalizations, the movement, it was a deliberate hunt, with him as the target. And the Bigfoot would not stop until it had assessed, tested, and maybe even killed him. The forest around him seemed to close in, the canopy thickening, shadows coiling with an almost predatory patience. He realized the stomps had pivoted. They were closing in, fast. A rock slammed against his shoulder, pain radiating sharply, forcing him sideways. Another struck his leg, the bone deep beneath his skin burning with impact. He stumbled, caught himself against a tree trunk, mud sliding beneath his boots. How many more hits before his leg stopped answering him? He forced himself forward, heart hammering, legs screaming, but the rhythm of the forest betrayed him. Footsteps circled, approaching from multiple directions now, not random, not panicked, measured. He could feel them closing from above, behind, to the sides. Rocks began to rain from multiple angles. One struck his arm, leaving a bruise already forming through the thin fabric of his sleeve. Another slammed into his shoulder, jerking him sideways. He ducked instinctively as more stones thudded near his boots, kicking up mud and leaves. The stomps had drawn closer, echoing off trunks. They weren't just behind him. They flanked him now, closing paths, constraining options. If every direction was blocked, which way did the predators expect him to move? Branches snapped overhead with exact timing, forcing him to dodge, turn, stumble. Rocks struck perilously close, clattering off trunks and falling around him. He tried to raise his rifle, but the weight felt unwieldy, mud clinging to the stock, blood from his scrapes making the grip slippery. Then from the shadowed edges, shapes began to emerge, larger, broader forms, moving upright, hidden partially behind trees, blending with the dim light and fog. At least 2, then 3, finally 5. Bigfoots, previously unseen, stepping into positions that surrounded him. They closed in, forming a semicircle. With a final effort, he stumbled toward a clearing visible through the trees ahead. The pack did not pursue. He stepped forward, forced by their manipulation. He knew that he was walking directly into the pack's command, but what else could he do in this situation? Ahead, some Bigfoot stepped fully into view. It was massive, towering, nearly 10 feet tall, shoulders broad as tree trunks, arms thick with muscle and sinew. Dark fur clung to bodies that were both humanoid and otherworldly, streaked with mud, knotted from the forest, yet sleek in motion. Their hands were enormous, fingers thick, knuckles defined. One started going towards him at a walking pace, each step unhurried, as if it knew there was nowhere for him to go. The distance closed in small, unbearable increments, 30 feet, then 20. Harlan's thoughts fractured, cycling through excuses that fell apart the longer he watched it move. Bears didn't walk like this. Men didn't move with this weight. The ground compressed under its feet, leaves folding into the soil with every step, and Harlan found himself counting them without meaning to, waiting for the moment it would break into a charge. It never did. Why rush when patience alone was already breaking him? At 10 feet, he could see the texture of its fur now, clumped with moisture, scarred in places, the chest rising and falling with calm, controlled breaths. The smell reached him, wet earth, musk, something old and animal, similar to the odor at the farm. Then at 5 feet, it stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Harlan had to tilt his head back to meet its eyes, close enough that he could feel the heat coming off its body, and knew with crushing certainty that if it decided to touch him, there would be nothing he could do to stop it. Harlan raised the rifle, panic clawing at his mind. The creature's gaze first scanned the barrel, then the man holding it. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature held the barrel gently, almost carefully, as if testing the weight and balance. Then it squeezed. Metal groaned. The barrel folded inward, collapsing like aluminum foil under pressure that should have required hydraulic tools. The creature crushed it slowly, deliberately, letting him watch as the weapon deformed and became useless. What chance did flesh and bone have after that display? It released the ruined rifle and let it drop to the ground between them. The sound of metal hitting earth seemed impossibly loud in the silence. He stared at the twisted barrel, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Nothing living should be that strong. Harlan's chest tightened, arms instinctively raising a branch in defense, but the creature's presence alone dwarfed any weapon he could wield. The creature stood over him now, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from its body. He pressed back against the tree trunk, unable to move further, trapped between the tree and something that could kill him without effort. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst. For a moment that stretched into eternity, the creature simply stood there. Close enough to end him. Close enough to reach down and crush his skull the way it had crushed the rifle barrel. He waited for it, certain that this was how it would finish, that he had pushed too far and now would pay the price. He had grabbed a branch without thinking, tearing it from a dead sapling as he staggered backward, his fingers closing around the first solid thing within reach. He swung it wildly, feeble against the immense forearm of the Bigfoot. The creature brushed the wood aside effortlessly, a gesture of precision and dominance rather than force. Rocks thudded into the clearing, thrown from hidden angles by the pack surrounding him, each impact sending mud and leaves exploding into the air. Pain bloomed across his shoulder and down his leg. He stumbled, barely catching himself before the wet earth swallowed him. The creatures advanced deliberately, encircling him within the clearing, moving silently but with purpose. Their eyes were fixed, calculating, as if measuring his strength, intent, and reactions. Harlan could feel their coordination, a network of intelligence guiding every step, every gaze, every stone thrown. The vocalizations began again, short huffs, guttural clicks, and low whistles. The Bigfoot in front of him stepped closer, looming over him. Its arms hung low, hands capable of crushing bone and metal alike. Harlan's eyes met its own. The intelligence, the focus, the unyielding assessment radiated power. The creature reached out, effortlessly closing the distance between them. The branch fell from his hands as it deflected it aside. Then the massive hand closed around the ruined rifle, bending it further, and let it drop. The dull snap echoed in the clearing, a final demonstration of strength and control. Harlan pressed backward, knees weak, chest heaving, but the creature did not pursue, did not strike. It merely stood, dominating space and presence, asserting intelligence over raw aggression. Why prove superiority if death wasn't the objective? For a tense moment, the clearing held its breath, broken only by Harlan's ragged breathing and the faint whisper of leaves shifting underfoot. Then the creature produced a low vocalization, short, measured, almost conversational in cadence. It wasn't a roar or a scream. It was deliberate communication. In that instant, the realization settled over him with crushing weight. The creature could have ended him at any moment, but it hadn't. What it was doing now wasn't mercy. It was restraint, dominance asserted without the need to kill. The pack maintained its perimeter, silent, observant, their eyes tracking every twitch of muscle, every involuntary movement. They had proven control, tested him, demonstrated superiority. Every step, every strike, every calculated pause reinforced a hierarchy. He was prey in their intelligence-driven ecosystem. Finally, the Bigfoot turned, moving fluidly back into the shadows of the forest. The pack followed, coordinated, silent, leaving Harlan in the clearing. Mud, leaves, and blood coated him. His body ached from bruises, scrapes, and exertion. His chest heaved, lungs burning, heart hammering. Harlan sank to his knees, hands gripping the wet earth. The rifle was useless, his branch irrelevant. He was broken, battered, and alive. The creatures had left, leaving no tracks in the immediate clearing, no footprints in the mud, only the residual pressure of their domination. Was survival the gift or the punishment? Harlan Briggs understood the truth fully. He had encountered something beyond human comprehension. Strength, intelligence, coordination, and strategy had been employed against him. He was not just prey. He was observed, tested, and left alive to carry the memory, to understand the scale and depth of what he had faced. My name is Ray. I am 54 years old. I have farmed the same 212 acres in rural eastern Oregon for 26 years, the same land my father farmed before me and his father before him. It was late September. The nights had turned cold and clear, the kind of high desert autumn that makes the stars look closer than they should. I went out at 5 in the morning to check the chickens the way I do every morning, and I found the coop broken into. Not by a coyote. I know coyote damage. I have been fighting coyotes on this land for 26 years, and I know the signature: the dug under, the torn wire, the scattered feathers, the small bones. This was not that. The wire on the east side of the coop had been pulled away from the frame. Not cut, not chewed, pulled. The staples drawn cleanly out of the wood as if they had been extracted one by one with a tool. The frame itself was intact. 4 birds were gone. The remaining birds were alive but pressed into the far corner in a silence I had never heard from chickens before. Not the noise of disturbed birds, the silence of birds that have decided that making any sound at all is a mistake. I stood in that coop for a long time, looking at the pulled staples. I have a neighbor, Walt, who runs sheep on the parcel to the north of mine. I called him that morning. He had lost 2 lambs the week before. He had chalked it up to cougar, which is not unreasonable in this country. I asked him to describe the kill site. He described something that did not match the cougar. No drag marks, no cached carcass, no bite pattern. The lambs were simply gone, as if they had been picked up and carried. I did not say what I was thinking. Walt is a practical man, and I am a practical man, and neither of us was going to say the word Bigfoot out loud. Not then, not to each other. That word belongs to a category of things that practical men in this part of Oregon do not say in serious conversation, and we were both working very hard to stay in serious conversation. I reinforced the co-op that afternoon. New wire, heavier gauge, doubled up on the staples. I ran a hot wire along the bottom of the frame. I put a padlock on the door. 3 nights later, 4 more birds were gone. The hot wire had been triggered. I could see where something had contacted it, the burn mark on the grass below the frame. Whatever it was had taken the shock, processed it, and continued. The heavy gauge wire was still in place, but the boards on the north side of the coop had been separated at the joint, the nails backing out of the wood with the same deliberate precision as the staples before them. A gap 6 inches wide, top to bottom. 6 inches is not enough for a coyote. It is not enough for a bear. It is barely enough for a determined raccoon, and a raccoon does not pull nails. I set up a camera. I set it on the post at the northeast corner of the coop yard, angled to cover the north wall. I ran a second one on the barn roof, covering the approach from the tree line. I checked them the next morning. The post camera was on the ground. Not fallen, the mount had been disassembled. The wing nut backed off the bolt, and the camera lifted free. It was sitting in the grass 6 feet from the post, face up, the way you set something down when you want to put it somewhere safe. The memory card was still in it. The last frame on the card was a wall of darkness with something at the right edge that I have looked at many times since. A shape, the lower portion of something. A leg, perhaps, or a forearm. Something large. The barn roof camera was still in place. It had captured nothing. Its field of view ended at the fence line, and whatever had been at the coop had approached from a different angle than I had anticipated. Something was taking my animals. It was large. The force required to extract staples and back out nails spoke to significant size and hand strength. It was intelligent. The camera removal, the approach angle that avoided my second camera, the hot wire shock absorbed and adapted to. It was returning on a 3-day cycle, which meant it had a range and a pattern, and I was a predictable stop on it. I decided to build a trap. I want to be specific about this because people have asked me since if I knew what I was trapping. The honest answer is, I suspected. The word Bigfoot had been sitting at the back of my mind like a splinter I was not ready to dig out. I had grown up in this country, and I had heard the stories my whole life, at the feed store, at the diner, from the older ranchers who had been on their land long enough to have things happen that they did not talk about in mixed company. I had always filed those stories in the same place I filed most things I could not verify, not dismissed, not accepted, just held. Now I was standing in my coop, looking at pulled staples and doing the arithmetic, and the arithmetic kept arriving at the same answer. But what I told myself I was building was a large animal trap, something that would hold whatever was taking my birds long enough for me to get a look at it and make a decision about what to do next. That is what I told myself. I built it from livestock panels, the heavy welded wire panels I use for cattle working pens. 8 panels, each 16 feet long and 52 inches tall, wired together at the corners with doubled fence wire. A frame of 4-inch steel posts driven 3 feet into the ground at each corner and at the midpoint of each long side. I roofed it with 2 additional panels laid flat and secured with wire at every junction. The door was a sliding panel of the same material, counterweighted with a bag of concrete, so it would drop fast when the trigger released. The trigger was a pressure plate, a section of half-inch plywood mounted on a spring mechanism over a shallow pit at the center of the enclosure. 30 pounds of pressure would release the door. I put the trigger under a pile of fresh straw with 4 chickens inside the enclosure, living birds that would make noise and draw something in. I built this in a day and a half. My wife, Carol, watched me build it and did not ask what I was trapping. She knows me well enough to know that when I am building something with that much steel, the conversation about why can wait until the thing is done. She brought me coffee in the afternoon and stood at the edge of the yard looking at the structure. She said, "That's a serious cage." I said, "It's a serious problem." She went back inside. I ran the game camera on the barn roof again, repositioned to cover the cage. I went to bed at 10. I set an alarm for 1 in the morning. I did not sleep much. At 1, I got up, dressed, and went out to the porch. Cold, mid-30s, clear, the moon 3/4 full, and throwing hard shadows across the yard. The cage was 40 feet from the porch. I could see it clearly. The chickens inside had quieted. I stood on the porch for an hour. Nothing came. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table with the light off and the window open until 3:15. Then I went back to bed. The alarm went off at 4:30. I was out the door by 4:32. The cage door was down. I stopped walking when I saw it, stood in the yard with the flashlight in my hand and the beam on the cage, and I did not move for what was probably 30 seconds. The door was down. The chickens were visible through the wire, alive, clustered at the far end of the enclosure, and in the center of the cage, standing with its back to me, was something I had no category for. It was facing away. That was the first thing. Facing away from me toward the tree line, as if it had been looking at the trees when the door came down and had not yet turned around. It was standing, fully upright, no crouch, just standing, occupying the space the way a person occupies a room. The top of it was above the roof line of the cage, the panels bowing slightly upward under pressure, even though the roof wire was secured at every junction. It was taller than my cage. My cage was 52 inches, 4'4". What was inside it was taller than that. The roof wire was bowing upward under the pressure of its head and shoulders. I will tell you what I felt in that moment because it is relevant to what I did next. I felt the specific satisfaction of a problem solved. For about 4 seconds, a trap I built from livestock panels and a concrete counterweight had done what I built it to do, and the part of my brain that solves problems registered the completion of the task before the other parts of my brain caught. Then it turned around. I have spent a lot of time since trying to find the right language for that moment, and I am not sure the right language exists. It turned around in the cage the way you turn around in a small room, carefully because the space was barely adequate, shifting its weight with a precision that told me it knew exactly where its body was in the space at all times. And when it was facing me, it looked at me. I have made eye contact with a lot of animals in 26 years of farming. Cattle, horses, dogs, coyotes, the occasional deer at the fence line in the morning. I know animal eye contact. I know what it looks like when something is registering you as a stimulus. This was not that. What looked at me through the wire of my livestock panels was making an assessment, a structured, patient, detailed assessment of the situation, the cage, the door, me, the distance between me and it, the flashlight, the yard, the house behind me. Its eyes moved, not the rapid scan of prey or the fixed lock of predator. A methodical inventory, the way you look at a room when you're trying to understand all of it at once. It knew it was caught, and it was deciding what to do about it. I backed up 3 steps without making a decision to back up. My boots found the ground, and I moved backward, and I did not take my flashlight off its face. The face. I am going to describe this plainly, because plainly is the only way I know how to talk, and dressing it up would not make it more true. The face was not human, but the proportions of it, the spacing of the eyes, the presence of a brow, the architecture of the jaw, were in the neighborhood of humans in a way that no animal I have encountered has been. It had hair across the forehead, reddish dark, the same material as the rest of it. The eyes were set forward like a predator's. The nose was broader than a human nose. The jaw was substantial in a way that suggested significant bite force. But the eyes were what stopped me from backing up further. Not because they were frightening, because they were considering me the same way I was considering them, with the same quality of organized attention, the same inventory. I had caught something that was thinking about being caught. I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table, and I am not too proud to tell you that my hands were not steady when I put the flashlight down. Carol came downstairs at 5. She looked at my face, and then out the kitchen window at the cage, and then at my face again. She said, "What is it?" I said, "I don't know exactly." She said, "Is it hurt?" That question had not occurred to me yet. I said, "I don't think so. I don't know." She went to the window. From the kitchen you could see the shape of it through the wire in the early light, the size of it, the way it was standing. Carol has lived on this land for 23 years. She is not a woman who frightens easily, and she is not a woman who pretends things are not what they are. She said, "Ray, that's not an animal." I said, "I know." She said, "Is it a Bigfoot?" I had not said the word out loud yet, not once since this started. I had held it at the back of my mind for 2 weeks and built a cage around the suspicion without ever naming it directly. And now my wife was saying it plainly, the way she said everything. I said, "I think so." She was quiet. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" I did not have an answer. I had built the trap to solve a problem, and I had solved it. And now I had a different problem that was significantly larger than the first one, and I had no framework for it at all. I had a list forming in my head of people I could call: the county sheriff, the state wildlife agency, the university extension office, and I was working through that list and finding that none of those calls made sense. What do you say? I have a Bigfoot in a livestock panel cage in my yard, and I need someone to come and collect it? The sheriff would send a deputy who would call his supervisor, who would call someone else, and by the end of the chain, there would be federal agencies and university researchers and wildlife photographers, and every single one of them would be making decisions about something in my yard that I had built and caught and was responsible for. There is no protocol for a captured Bigfoot. I have looked since. There is genuinely no protocol. I went back outside at 6. It had sat down, not collapsed, not cowering. Sat down the way you sit when you have been standing for a while and have decided that standing is no longer the most efficient use of your energy. Cross-legged on the ground, which meant it understood the geometry of the space well enough to know that sitting was viable, where standing was a strain. The chickens had moved to within a few feet of it, which told me something about its smell or its energy, or something I do not have a word for. Prey animals do not voluntarily approach predators. Those chickens had made a calculation. I walked to within 10 feet of the cage. It looked at me, the same quality of attention as before, organized, patient, not aggressive. It glanced at the cage door, at the counterweight, at the mechanism I had used to trigger the drop. Its gaze moved across the components with the systematic thoroughness of something that was reverse engineering what had happened to it. That is when I understood that the cage was not going to hold. Not because the steel was inadequate. 4-inch posts driven 3 feet into rocky eastern Oregon soil are not going anywhere. Not because the wire was too light. A 16-gauge livestock panel is rated for cattle, and it held. The cage would hold, but whatever was in it had already figured out how the door worked. I could see it in the way its attention had moved across the mechanism. Give it time and privacy, and it would solve the door. Maybe not today. Maybe not by brute force, though I did not discount brute force given the evidence of what it had done to my coop, but it would solve it. I had maybe a day. I went back inside and I told Carol what I was thinking. She said, "Then you need to decide before the day is up." She was right. I had 3 options. Call someone, and if so, who and what happens after. Release it, open the door, and step back, or keep it and figure out next steps from there. The call option kept failing because I could not identify a single institution I trusted to handle this decently. I have dealt with government agencies my entire farming life. I know how institutions handle things they have no category for, badly, and in ways that benefit the institution more than the thing. Whatever was in that cage was not a specimen. I watched it think. I was not going to hand it to people who would treat it like one. The keep it option failed because I had already watched it study my cage door, and I did not have enough livestock panels to build something it couldn't eventually solve. That left the release option. I did not act on the release option immediately. I want to be honest about why. I was not ready. I had built a trap for a reason, and the reason had not resolved itself, and releasing it felt like admitting the reason was wrong. So instead, I went back out to the cage at 9 in the morning, and I stood 10 feet from it, and I watched. It had moved since 6. It was no longer sitting cross-legged. It had shifted to the east side of the enclosure and was standing, one hand on the wire, its weight distributed the way weight distributes when you have been standing for a while and your body is managing the fatigue without complaint. It was looking northeast, not at me, not at the house, northeast. The direction of the tree line beyond my property boundary, the direction it had come from. I had the distinct impression that it was tracking something, not visually. Nothing was visible from where it stood. Something else. Sound, maybe. Or something I do not have a word for because I do not have the equipment to perceive it. I went inside and got my notebook. I came back out and I sat in the folding chair I use for morning chores, and I started writing down what I was observing the way I write down everything I observe on this property that I do not have an immediate explanation for. It is a habit from 26 years of farming. If you cannot explain it yet, record it. Something I wrote down that morning, 9:15. Right hand on wire at shoulder height, fingers curled around the gauge in a grip that is not testing the wire, is just resting there, left arm at its side, eyes oriented northeast, breathing slow, deliberate, deeper rhythm than what I would expect from something at rest, not distress, not a panting or a starved breath. The breath of something that is using its respiratory system for something other than simple oxygenation. Listening, maybe, receiving. At 9:40, it turned its head and looked at me. Not with surprise. It knew I was there. It had known I was there from the moment I sat down. The turn of the head was not a response to my presence. It was something else. An acknowledgement, maybe, a check. The way you look at someone in the room when you want to confirm they are still there before you go back to whatever you were attending to. It looked at me for about 8 seconds. Then it looked northeast again. I wrote that down too. I want to tell you what it is like to sit 10 feet from a caged Bigfoot for 3 hours on a September morning, because people have asked me since, and I have not known how to answer. The honest answer is that it was the most concentrated observation I have ever done in 26 years of farming, which is a life spent in close daily attention to living things. I have watched cattle and horses and dogs and working animals of every kind. I know what animals look like across the range of their states: contentment, fear, hunger, illness, the particular unease of an animal that senses weather changing. I have a large catalog, and I know how to read it. What was in that cage did not fit the catalog, not because it was alien, because it was too close. The attention it directed at its environment was organized in a way that kept making me feel I was observing something that was also observing me. Not defensively, not aggressively, but with the same quality of systematic interest that I was bringing to it. I kept catching myself adjusting my posture, the way you adjust your posture when you become aware that someone is watching you work. It was not watching me work. It was doing what it was doing, but the quality of its ambient awareness kept producing that response in me. At 10, I wrote, "This is not like watching an animal. This is like sitting in a room with someone." I crossed that out and wrote it again and left it. The morning went on. Carol brought me coffee at 10 and stood behind the chair for a minute, looking at the cage. She did not say anything. She went back inside. At 10:30, the thing in the cage sat back down, cross-legged again, and closed its eyes. Not sleep. The rhythm of the breathing changed, but remained deliberate, and the posture did not have the slackness of sleep. Something more like what I have seen horses do when they are conserving energy but remaining alert. A very particular kind of rest. I sat with it for another hour. What I kept coming back to, sitting in that folding chair in the September morning, was the chicken. A single bird had climbed into the thing's lap at some point between 6 and 9. It was still there when I came out at 9. A Rhode Island red hen, one of the older ones, sitting in its lap the way a hen sits when it has found a satisfactory perch and sees no reason to move. The thing had not moved it, was not touching it, just sitting with a chicken in its lap, the chicken apparently unbothered, and the two of them oriented in the same direction. I do not know what to do with that image. I have thought about it a great deal. Prey animals do not voluntarily approach predators. That hen had made a calculation and arrived at a conclusion and acted on the conclusion, and the calculation had not produced any outcome the hen appeared to regret. I have run chickens on this land for 26 years, and I have a sense for how they rid situations. What that hen had read in the thing in the cage was not a predator, which meant I did not know what it was, which meant the word Bigfoot, which I had been holding at arm's length for 2 weeks, was not the end of the understanding. It was just the beginning of it. At noon, I went inside and ate lunch and made a decision. I was going to release it. I was going to walk out to the cage with the bolt cutters, cut the counterweight wire, and open the door and step back and let it go. I had spent 6 hours watching something that was not what I had thought I was trapping, and I was not willing to keep it through a second night. I told Carol. She nodded and said, "Do you want me there?" I said no. She said, "I'll be at the window." I went out with the bolt cutters at 12:30. It was standing when I came out, not the way it had been standing at 9, with one hand on the wire and the attention oriented away. It was facing the door when I came through the back gate, fully upright, both arms at its sides, watching me cross the yard with the bolt cutters in my hand. It knew what the bolt cutters were for. I want to be careful about that claim because I have made a lot of claims in this account, and I want to hold the line between what I observed and what I inferred. What I observed was that it watched my approach to the counterweight mechanism with the same quality of attention it had given to the cage architecture that morning, organized, tracking, following the logic of what was happening, and that when I positioned the bolt cutters on the wire and looked up at it, its weight shifted forward, not lunging, not rushing the door. The slight lean of something that has been waiting for a particular moment and has just recognized its arrival. I cut the wire. The counterweight dropped. The door went up. I stepped back to the far edge of the yard and I watched. It did not move immediately. It stood at the open door for what felt like a long time, 30 seconds, perhaps 40, looking at the opening, looking at me across the yard, looking at the tree line beyond the fence. I have spent time thinking about what those 30 or 40 seconds contained. The most practical version is simple: a cautious animal assessing whether the open door was a new kind of trap before committing to it. The version I keep returning to, the one I cannot dismiss, is that something more like a decision was being made. Not about whether to leave, that was already decided. About something else. Something I was part of. It took 3 steps toward me. I want to say clearly that I did not run. Not because I was brave, because the fear response was slower than the situation. By the time my body understood it should be afraid, it was already over. 3 steps, which put it approximately 6 feet from where I was standing, and then it stopped. 6 feet. I could see the individual hairs at its brow line. I could see the specific color differentiation in the fur where the chest darkened relative to the arms. I could see the size of its hands in a way the cage wire had not allowed, the full unobstructed fact of them, the length of the fingers relative to the palm, the thickness of the joints. These were the hands that had pulled my staples. They were twice the size of mine. It looked at me for what I estimated was 15 seconds. A specific, organized attention, the same inventory it had run through the cage wire that morning, applied now to my face at 6 feet. I did not move. I did not speak. I breathed as steadily as I could manage, and I held the bolt cutters at my side, and I looked back. Then it turned, walked to the fence at the northeast corner of the property, stepped over the top wire the way I would step over a low curb, and went north, straight north, toward the pasture, toward the cattle pen 200 yards up the slope. I did not understand the direction immediately. I thought it was simply the most direct route to the tree line, and I stood at the edge of my yard and watched it go, and I thought, it is done. The problem is resolved. I made the right call. Then I heard the cattle. The cattle pen is 200 yards north of the main yard, past the barn, at the edge of the property where the pasture meets the tree line. I run 23 head on that pasture in the fall. I have run cattle on this land for 26 years. I know every sound they make in every condition, in heat, in cold, in the presence of a coyote at the perimeter, in the hours before a weather change. I know the sound of a herd that has been startled, and the sound of a herd that has been hurt, and the sound of a herd that has simply smelled something it does not recognize. What I heard coming from the north pasture as I went through the back gate was none of those things. I was running by the time I came around the barn. The fence was down on the east side of the pen. 2 rails snapped clean at the midpoint, the posts they had been nailed to pulled from the ground and lying in the pasture grass still attached to the nails. Something had gone through the fence rather than over it, not a gap, through, in the way that something goes through a thing when the thing is simply not a relevant obstacle. The herd was bunched at the far west corner, pressed together in the way prey animals press when they have identified a threat and run out of options. All 20 of them accounted for, all of them alive. All of them were as still as I have ever seen 20 cattle be at once, which is a kind of stillness I did not know cattle were capable of producing. 3 of the younger steers were not in the corner. I will tell you what I found in the order I found it, and I will tell you plainly, and I will not describe it in more detail than the account requires. The first steer was at the edge of the pasture near the irrigation ditch. It had not been dragged there. It had not been fed upon. What had been done to it had been done quickly, and had been done by something operating at a level of force I have no comparison for in 26 years of ranching. The second steer was 20 yards further north, the same. The third I found at the north fence line, against the wire. I stood in that pasture for a long time. I had released it. That is the thing I kept coming back to, standing there in the September morning with the sun fully up and the shadow of the barn cutting across the pasture grass behind me. I had released it. I had made the decision I thought was the right one. I had walked out with the bolt cutters and cut the counterweight wire and opened the door and stepped back and watched it walk north. And the direction it walked had told me nothing. And I had stood at the edge of my yard and thought, the problem is resolved. 3 steers at the north fence line told me something different about what the problem had actually been. I understand now what 11 hours in a cage 4 feet 4 inches tall does to something that has spent its whole life moving through open country. I had watched the intelligence across those 11 hours. The inventory, the assessment, the patience, the chicken sitting unbothered in its lap. I had watched all of it, and I had made a calculation about what it was. I had not made an adequate calculation about what 11 hours of confinement was doing to what it was underneath the intelligence. I stood in my north pasture, and I looked at the tree line where it had gone, and I thought about the 15 seconds of eye contact at 6 feet before it turned. About the specific quality of that attention, about what it had been deciding in those 15 seconds that I had not understood it was deciding. I think it had already decided about the cattle before it looked at me. I think the 15 seconds were something else. I have farmed this land for 26 years, and I have dealt with losses before, to weather, to disease, to coyotes, and the occasional cougar. Losses are part of this work. You account for them, and you absorb them. And you keep going because stopping is not a viable option on a working farm. I absorbed this one. I kept going. I stood in that pasture with the September morning clear and cold around me and the tree line quiet to the north, and I understood, in a way that I had not understood before that morning, the size of what I had been dealing with. I had built a trap to solve a problem. What I had not understood until I was standing in my north pasture looking at the tree line was the size of the problem I was actually dealing with. It was late March when I first reviewed the trail camera footage that would change everything. In the frame, my pasture fence line appeared normal for exactly 4 seconds. Then, at the far right edge of the screen, a massive silhouette stepped partially into view before immediately retreating back into darkness. The figure stood upright. Its shoulder width exceeded anything I had seen in decades of living on this property. I replayed the footage 17 times that morning, trying to extract any additional detail from the grainy night vision recording. Each viewing confirmed the same disturbing facts. The figure moved with deliberate caution, its posture suggesting awareness of the camera's position. The way it pulled back indicated intelligence, not the random movement of wildlife wandering through the frame. Something knew the camera was there and had chosen to remain just outside its full field of view. The next morning, I found a section of fence along the eastern perimeter bent outward. The metal posts, designed to withstand livestock pressure, had been pushed from the inside as though something with tremendous force had tested the boundary. I measured the deformation carefully. The fence had been displaced approximately 14 inches from its original position. No wires were snapped. No posts were uprooted. Just a deliberate, controlled bend that suggested strength far beyond what any local animal possessed. Black bears in the region typically weighed between 200 and 400 pounds and left claw marks when interacting with structures. This fence showed no scratches, no tears in the wire mesh, no indication of an animal trying to get through a barrier. Instead, it looked like something had simply placed its weight against the fence and pushed, testing the strength of the boundary without any intention of crossing it. But what happened 4 nights later made the fence incident seem like nothing more than a gentle warning. 4 nights after the fence incident, my cattle began acting strangely. Around 9:30 p.m., All 16 heads clustered tightly into the back corner of the pasture, facing outward in a defensive formation I had only seen when coyotes prowled nearby. But there were no coyotes that night, just an unnatural stillness that settled over the property like a held breath. The temperature had dropped to around 54 degrees, typical for early April evenings in this region. The moon was 3 days past full, providing enough ambient light to see shapes and movement across the open pasture. Yet despite the visibility, I could identify nothing that would explain my cattle's behavior. They stood pressed together, their breath forming small clouds in the cool air, their attention fixed on the tree line to the east. Standing on my porch, I listened. The usual chorus of crickets and distant owl calls had gone silent. In 23 years of living on this property, I had learned to read the night sounds. Silence meant a predator, but predators didn't silence an entire forest. Coyotes, bobcats, even the occasional mountain lion reported in the area, none of them created this kind of absolute quiet. The stillness felt wrong, as though every creature within a half-mile radius had simultaneously decided to stop making noise. Then, from somewhere deep in the tree line, roughly 80 yards away, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, spaced about 3 seconds apart. Each step produced a heavy crunch in the underbrush that suggested significant weight. The steps moved parallel to the fence line for nearly 2 minutes before stopping completely. The rhythm never varied. The pattern felt purposeful, like something walking a patrol route, rather than an animal wandering in search of food. I aimed my flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through darkness, but revealed nothing except swaying branches and empty space between trees. Whatever had been there was either gone or standing perfectly still beyond the light's reach. I swept the beam back and forth along the tree line for nearly 5 minutes, searching for any reflection of eyes, any movement, any confirmation of what my ears had detected. The light showed only trees and shadows. Morning brought the first physical evidence. In a patch of mud near the cattle's water trough, I found a print. The impression measured roughly 17 inches long and nearly 8 inches across at the widest point. 5 distinct toe marks pressed deep into the soil, each toe showing individual definition that ruled out any kind of boot or artificial print. The depth of the impression suggested a weight far exceeding that of any black bear native to the region. I had seen bear prints before. They showed claw marks extending beyond the toe pads. This print showed no claws. The stride length between prints measured close to 5 feet, indicating something that moved on 2 legs with a gait that no 4-legged animal could replicate. I photographed the print from multiple angles, placing a dollar bill next to it for scale reference. The bill measured 6 inches long. The print dwarfed it. I made a plaster cast, mixing the powder carefully and pouring it into the impression with the precision of someone who understood I might need proof of what I was seeing. While the plaster dried, I walked the fence line looking for additional prints or disturbances. I found 3 more impressions in softer soil near the eastern corner post, all showing the same massive size and bipedal stride pattern. Whatever had walked my property the previous night had weight enough to sink nearly 2 inches into packed earth. I thought finding physical proof would give me some sense of control over the situation. I was wrong. What came next proved that whatever was out there wasn't just passing through, it was studying me. The following week brought a new pattern. On 3 consecutive nights, I woke to the sound of footsteps circling my barn. Not random wandering, but a deliberate, measured pace that suggested purposeful movement. The steps always followed the same route, starting at the northwest corner, moving clockwise around the entire structure, then stopping at the exact point where they began. The rhythm never varied. Heavy step, pause, heavy step, pause. The pattern was so consistent it felt rehearsed, as though whatever was out there had walked that same path many times before. On the second night, I timed the intervals with my watch. Each circuit took roughly 4 minutes, disturbingly consistent for something that was supposed to be wildlife. The consistency was unsettling. Animals don't move with that kind of precision. I tried to catch a glimpse from my bedroom window, which offered a partial view of the barn's southern side. But each time I looked out, The footsteps would pause immediately, as though the creature could sense when it was being observed. The moment I stepped back from the window, the walking would resume. After the third attempt, I gave up and simply listened, mapping the creature's route in my mind by tracking the sound of each footfall against the barn's exterior. The footsteps were heavy enough that I could feel faint vibrations through my house's foundation when the creature passed the closest point to my bedroom. Based on the sound and the slight tremor, the creature was extremely heavy, though I had no way to confirm any specific weight. The only certainty was that nothing in the region's natural wildlife catalog matched what I was hearing. On the fourth morning, I found something that elevated my concern from confusion to genuine unease. A metal feed bin lid, which weighed close to 40 pounds, had been lifted off its container and placed upright against the barn wall. Not knocked over, not dragged. Carefully positioned in a standing position that required both strength and deliberate intention. I examined the bin carefully. The lid showed no dents, no scratch marks, no indication it had been pried or forced. It had simply been removed and relocated with care that suggested opposable grip, strength, and problem-solving intelligence. The bin had been stored in the barn, with the lid secured by its own weight and a simple friction fit. Removing it required understanding how the lid worked, not just brute force. Over the next 5 nights, a disturbing pattern emerged. Each morning, I found 3 gates unlatched in the exact same sequence. First, the gate to the chicken coop, then the gate to the equipment shed, then the gate to the back pasture. Never in a different order, never just 1 or 2. Always all 3, always in that specific progression. The latches showed no damage, no scratch marks from claws, no pry marks from tools. They had been lifted cleanly, the way a person would open them, but at times when no person should have been on my property. Whatever was visiting my farm was returning to the same locations night after night, interacting with my property in ways that demonstrated both memory and intention. But then it did something that made all those previous incidents feel like practice runs for what was really coming. On April 19th, while walking the fence line just before sunset, I experienced something that crossed the line from strange to genuinely frightening. As I walked along the tree line bordering my property, every single one of my footsteps was answered by another footstep from within the woods. The mimic matched my rhythm perfectly. When I took 2 quick steps, 2 heavy steps responded. When I stopped, the echo stopped instantly. The evening light was fading quickly, the sun already below the horizon, leaving only the pale glow of twilight filtering through the trees. Visibility extended about 40 yards into the forest before the shadows became too thick to penetrate. Whatever was matching my movements remained just beyond that visible range, hidden in the darkening woods, but close enough that I could hear each footfall with perfect clarity. I tested it deliberately. 1 step. The forest answered with 1 step, the sound coming from approximately 30 yards into the trees. 3 steps in quick succession. 3 heavy impacts responded immediately, matching my rhythm with precision that seemed impossible for random coincidence. I stopped and counted to 10. Silence. I took 2 slow steps. 2 slow, heavy steps answered from the same location. I changed my pace, walking in an irregular pattern. 2 quick steps, pause, 1 slow step, pause, 3 quick steps. The mimic matched every variation perfectly, maintaining the same approximate distance while demonstrating an ability to adapt its movement to my changing rhythm. The moment I turned and walked quickly back toward the house, the mimic footsteps stopped completely. Silence returned to the woods. Whatever was out there could move through the tree line without revealing itself, close enough for every step to match mine. The precision didn't feel like wandering, it felt like something paying close attention to me. I invested in additional trail cameras, hoping to finally capture clear footage of whatever was stalking my property. Instead, the cameras seemed to fail at the exact moments something should have triggered them. Footage showed clear recordings of deer, possums, and my own movements during daylight hours. But at night, during the times I heard activity around the barn or near the house, The cameras produced corrupted files at the exact moments the infrared triggers should have activated, leaving blank segments instead of footage. One camera, positioned near the eastern fence line, captured a single frame that made it through uncorrupted. The image showed a blurred shoulder and part of a massive arm reaching past the camera's field of view. The arm appeared covered in dark hair and measured thicker than any human limb. The frame before and after showed nothing but static. Around this same period, my cattle began refusing to graze anywhere near the eastern fence. They would walk to within 20 feet of that boundary and then turn away, choosing to crowd into the western section of the pasture even when fresh grass grew untouched on the eastern side. They were avoiding an area where they sensed danger. I tried to tell myself the worst was over, that maybe the creature was moving on. Then one night it answered me back, and I realized the terror was only beginning. On the night of May 2nd, while standing on my back porch, I heard two distinct knocking sounds from deep within the woods. The sounds were sharp and resonant, like wood striking wood with significant force. The knocks came from a location I estimated to be roughly 200 yards into the forest. I had read about tree knocking, about how some researchers believed large primates used the sound to communicate over distance. I had always dismissed such claims as folklore and misidentification, but standing there in the dark, hearing those deliberate impacts echo through the trees, I made a decision that surprised myself. I picked up a thick branch from the woodpile and struck it hard against a fence post. One solid knock. Then I waited. The response came within 5 seconds. 3 knocks, rapid succession, from a completely different direction than the original sounds. The new knocks came from somewhere northwest of my position, perhaps 150 yards away. Whatever had answered me had either moved with impossible speed, or there were 2 of them communicating across the darkness. I did not knock again. Some experiments should not be repeated. The morning of May 7th brought one of the most unnerving discoveries of the entire ordeal. I walked out to the pasture to find all 16 cattle arranged in a perfect circle, facing inward, as though they had been deliberately herded into that formation during the night. The circle measured approximately 20 feet in diameter. Each animal stood calm and uninjured, but the positioning was precise in a way that natural animal behavior does not produce. The fencing showed no breaks. No gates had been opened. Whatever had arranged my livestock into that circle had done so without causing panic, injury, or any attempt to harm them. The display seemed designed not to predate, but to demonstrate capability, to show that it could control my animals any time it chose to. What happened 3 days later proved it could get even closer than I ever imagined. May 10th marked the first time I saw the creature at close range. I was checking the water trough near the barn around 8:30 p.m., just after sunset. The shadows were thick, but not yet completely dark. As I bent down to inspect the valve, I felt the sudden, instinctive sensation of being watched. I straightened slowly and turned my head toward the equipment area. There, standing directly behind my tractor roughly 25 feet away, was a massive upright figure. Even in the dim light, the size was unmistakable. The silhouette stood at least 8 feet tall, with shoulders that extended far beyond human proportions. The head appeared slightly conical, sitting atop a thick neck with almost no visible separation. For 3 seconds, neither the creature nor I moved. Then, without any sound of effort or hurry, it took one enormous step backward and disappeared into the darkness beyond the barn. No running, no crashing through brush. Just a single controlled movement that carried it out of sight with unnatural silence. I stood frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. I had finally seen it clearly enough to know that whatever was stalking my farm was not a bear, not a person, and not anything I could report to authorities without being dismissed outright. But seeing it from 25 feet away was nothing compared to what it did next, when it marked my home as its territory. The scratches appeared on 3 trees surrounding my house at roughly equal distances. The marks ran from about 7 feet off the ground down to roughly 5 feet, carved in parallel lines that looked like they had been made by something dragging downward with significant pressure. The edges of the scratches were smooth, not jagged, like claw marks would be. They appeared almost burnished, as though made by something scraping with controlled force rather than tearing. The 3 trees formed a rough triangle with my house at the center, suggesting the marks were intentional boundary indicators rather than random damage. Whatever had made them wanted me to know my house was now inside a defined perimeter. The question that kept me awake that night was simple and terrifying. Was I inside a territory or inside a trap? I got my answer 3 nights later when it climbed onto my porch for the first time. At 3:17 a.m. on May 15th, I woke to the sound of my porch boards creaking under extreme weight. My front porch was built from oak planks over solid joists, designed to support furniture and foot traffic without noise. Yet each step produced a deep groan that indicated something far heavier than any person was moving across the wood. The footsteps moved slowly from left to right, pausing every few seconds as though the creature was testing each board before committing its full weight. I could hear breathing through the front door, the same slow, controlled respiration I'd come to recognize. I remained completely still in my bed, barely breathing myself, knowing that the door was unlocked, knowing that only a single wooden barrier separated me from something that could tear that door off its hinges if it chose to. After nearly 2 minutes, the footsteps moved back across the porch and descended the stairs. I heard them fade into the distance, moving toward the barn. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. The porch was terrifying enough. But 2 nights later, it showed me just how much force it could bring to bear if it wanted to. At approximately 1:30 a.m., a violent slam shook the barn so hard that I felt the vibration in my house 40 yards away. My cattle inside erupted into panic, crashing against their stalls and bellowing in terror. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside, certain I would find a vehicle had crashed into the structure or a tree had fallen against the wall. Instead, I found a deep dent in the barn's exterior metal siding, shaped like a shoulder or torso impression. The dent measured roughly 3 feet wide and extended about 18 inches in height. The metal had buckled inward from a single massive impact. No fallen branches, and nothing that could explain the force required to damage reinforced barn siding that severely. Whatever had hit the wall had done so with enough power to terrify my livestock and leave structural damage that would cost hundreds of dollars to repair. The dent felt like a warning rather than random impact. On May 21st, one of my trail cameras finally captured something that made it through without corruption. The footage showed a single frame of an eye reflecting the camera's infrared light. The eye appeared at a height of approximately 7 feet off the ground, far above where any human eye would be positioned. The reflection showed a reddish-orange color, typical of eyeshine, but the size and placement were wrong for any known animal in the region. The eye blinked once, a slow, deliberate closure and reopening before the feed cut to complete black. The timestamp showed 11:43 p.m. The camera had been positioned facing a trail that led from the woods toward the barn, meaning whatever had triggered it had been approaching the property when the image was captured. I reviewed the frame dozens of times, zooming in on every detail. The eye showed awareness, not the blank stare of a startled animal. It appeared to be looking directly at the camera, as though the creature knew exactly where the device was positioned and had chosen to stare into it before cutting the feed. Then it began circling my house at night, and I realized it was no longer content to just watch from a distance. On May 24th, I discovered footprints that circled my entire house for the first time. The tracks formed a complete loop around the foundation, pressed into soft soil and patches of remaining mud from recent rain. The prints were deeper than previous impressions, indicating the creature had been standing in each location for extended periods, rather than simply walking past. At certain points, the tracks showed where the figure had stood facing the house, positioned directly in line with windows or doors. The spacing between prints grew shorter near the back porch, suggesting slower, more careful movement in that area. The creature was no longer maintaining distance. It was studying the house in detail, testing approaches, and spending more time at closer range during each visit. The pattern showed escalation toward some kind of conclusion that I could sense building like pressure before a storm. Over the next 3 nights, the visits came earlier and lasted longer. Where the creature had previously arrived well after midnight, now it approached the property as early as 9 p.m. The breathing at the windows occurred multiple times each night. The footsteps circled the house repeatedly, rather than just once. I began sleeping with my phone charged and ready, my flashlight within reach, and my bedroom door locked, despite knowing that a lock would provide no real protection against something that could dent metal barn siding with a single impact. On the afternoon of May 27th, while repairing fence line, I heard movement in the woods and caught a glimpse of a massive shape keeping pace with me as I worked, staying just inside the tree line about 50 yards away. It was watching me during daylight now, not just at night. That evening, after sunset, I heard it settle somewhere just outside the barn. The sound was like something large lowering itself to the ground, followed by silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of something waiting. Then the storm came, and in the lightning flashes, I finally saw exactly what had been stalking me for 2 months. The power went out at 10:37 p.m. My entire property dropped into complete darkness, except for the occasional flash of lightning from a storm system moving through the area. The outage wasn't unusual for a spring storm, but the timing made it feel intentional, even though there was no proof of anything beyond weather. In those brief bursts of light, I saw it. Standing in my front yard, roughly 30 feet from the porch, was the full silhouette of the creature. The lightning revealed massive head structure that appeared slightly conical, with a pronounced brow ridge that cast deep shadows across where the face would be. The shoulders seemed impossibly broad, extending far beyond human proportions, giving the figure a wedge-shaped upper body that tapered to a narrower waist. The arms hung past where its knees would be, the hands appearing massive even in silhouette. The creature stood completely still, facing the house directly. In that frozen moment of illumination, I could see it was not leaning or crouching. It stood fully upright with perfect posture, its height exceeding 8 feet by what appeared to be several inches. The proportions were wrong for any known animal. The stillness was wrong for any living thing caught in a lightning flash. Most creatures startled by sudden light would flinch or react. This one simply stood, as though it had been waiting in that exact position for me to see it. Another flash of lightning 3 seconds later. It had moved 10 feet closer. No sound of footsteps. No visible motion between the darkness and the light. Just a position shift that occurred between moments of illumination, as though the creature could cross distance during the blackness without disturbing the ground or making any audible approach. I retreated to my bedroom and activated my phone's audio recorder, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the device. Through the walls, I heard heavy, slow footsteps approaching the house. Each step produced a deep impact that I felt through the floor, the vibrations traveling up through the foundation and into my bones. The steps were methodical, measured, carrying weight that compressed the earth with each footfall. Then came breathing at my bedroom window, so close I could hear the slight whistle of air moving through whatever served as the creature's nostrils. The recording captured it clearly, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that continued for nearly 30 seconds. Each breath moved significant volume of air, the sound deeper and more resonant than human breathing, suggesting lung capacity, far exceeding normal mammalian proportions for even large animals. I remained frozen in my bed, the phone clutched in my trembling hand, recording equipment that felt absurdly inadequate for documenting what was happening outside my window. The breathing continued with mechanical regularity. Inhale for 3 seconds. Exhale for 4. Inhale for 3. Exhale for 4. The creature was not exerting itself. It was not agitated. It was simply standing at my window, breathing calmly while I cowered inside. Then came a sound that turned my blood to ice. A low vocalization, not quite a growl, but deeper than any human voice could produce, that resonated through the walls like a subsonic vibration. The sound lasted approximately 4 seconds, before fading into a final, long exhale. The vocalization felt intentional, directed, as though the creature was announcing its presence in a way that required acknowledgement. The recording captured everything: the breathing, the vocalization, the exhale, and then the sound of footsteps moving away from the house. I listened until I could no longer hear anything except my own breathing and the sound of rain beginning to fall. When the sun came up, I made a decision. I walked into those woods following the trail where I'd seen the creature disappear. I don't know what I hoped to find. Answers, maybe. Proof that would make someone believe me. Or maybe I just needed to face whatever was out there on my own terms instead of waiting for it to come back to my window one more time. I followed tracks that led deeper into the forest, past the creek bed where the ground turned soft and muddy. The prints were fresh, enormous, pressed deep into the earth. I kept walking, following them further than I should have, until I reached a clearing I'd never seen before, despite living on this land for over 2 decades. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me, heavy, deliberate, the same rhythm I'd come to know over the past 2 months. I turned around, and there it stood at the edge of the clearing, fully visible in the morning light for the first time. It was bigger than I'd even imagined. The face showed intelligence in the eyes, something that looked almost human, but fundamentally wasn't. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Then it took a step toward me. I don't remember what happened after that. My name is Marcus Webb, and I run a 240-acre cattle ranch in the Cascade Foothills outside Packwood, Washington, about 15 miles from the nearest town. I've been on this land for over 2 decades, and I had never seen Bigfoot until the night of October 14th. But this was no ordinary night. The ranch had been quiet all through October. The herd was healthy, with no predator pressure since late summer when a bear had tested the eastern fence line twice and moved on. That was the last time anything from the forest came onto the property with real intent. On the night of October 15th, around 9:45 p.m., I heard the cattle start making noise. Somehow, this was not the low, restless sound they make when a coyote is working the perimeter. It was sustained, panicked bellowing, the kind that comes from active pursuit or active contact, as if something were chasing them. So I grabbed my flashlight and gun and headed toward the pasture to check. The sound got worse as I got closer. The bellowing was layered with multiple animals, and beneath it I could hear something else. Heavy footfalls in the pasture soil, much heavier than anything deer or elk make. I reached the fence line and put the flashlight across the field. Up ahead, I saw a huge animal. It was Bigfoot. Bigfoot was 150 yards out, deep in the pasture, with a calf's hind legs in both hands, pulling it across the ground toward the eastern tree line. The flashlight beam caught it full on, and for a second, I just stood at that fence and processed what I was looking at. The calf was alive, legs kicking, full panic, trying to find its footing. Bigfoot was moving it steadily and continuously, as if the 400-pound weight were not a variable at all. He didn't move fast or slow. Seeing I needed to save my calf, I shouted. Instantly, Bigfoot stopped, and his head turned toward the flashlight beam. And then he held there, looking at me, still holding the calf's legs, while I stood at the fence with a rifle I hadn't raised yet. Those eyes caught his flashlight. I saw a greenish eye shine, steady and direct, the way eye shine looks when an animal is fully focused on what it's looking at, rather than tracking movement. After a few seconds, Bigfoot turned back to the tree line and kept dragging the calf. This time, though, I raised my gun. At first, I fired a warning shot into the air, and just so you know, a .308 is not a quiet rifle. The shot cracked across the pasture and echoed off both tree lines, and everything in the field went still for a beat, including Bigfoot. This caused Bigfoot to release the calf, but now he was standing to full height. I want to put a number to what full height looked like from 150 yards with a flashlight. Still, the honest answer is that the numbers I came up with in that moment, 8 feet, 8.5, feel inadequate now that I've had years to think about what I was actually seeing relative to the fence posts behind it. The top of my fence posts sits at 5 feet. Bigfoot's shoulders were well above them by a margin. Whatever the measurement was, it did not belong in a Pacific Northwest cattle pasture. Then Bigfoot screamed, a deep roar that started low and built and then sustained for about 4 seconds. I felt it even from 150 yards, not the sound itself, but the pressure behind it, the low frequency that bypasses your ears and registers somewhere in the body instead. The cattle that were still upright pressed against the far fence. A group of them that had been milling along the south side went still and stayed still. Then Bigfoot reached back down, picked up the calf's legs, and walked the remaining distance to the tree line, where it disappeared into the forest. Apparently, my warning shot had accomplished nothing except confirming that I was there. I stood at the fence for a moment after Bigfoot went into the trees. The cattle were still bunched against the far fence. The pasture was quiet, and there was a drag mark in the soil from where the calf had been pulled. I stood at the fence and looked at it. This was a problem. I called my neighbor, Tom Harrison, and told him that someone was stealing my cattle and that I needed another set of eyes and another rifle. Tom had worked on ranches his whole life, and he didn't ask many questions. He showed up at 10:15 p.m. with his 2 adult sons, all 3 armed, and we moved toward the tree line with flashlights. We found the calf about 200 yards into the forest. It was dead, its neck broken cleanly. The kill was efficient, the kind of efficiency that comes from something that knows exactly where to apply pressure and in what direction. It turns out that Bigfoot had carried the 400-pound animal 200 yards into a dark forest, killed it, and left it there. I don't know exactly what that means, but I know it's not the behavior of an animal hunting for food in any straightforward sense. Just then, we heard the coops. When we arrived, the chicken coop was not the way I had left it that evening. The door had been pulled completely off and thrown several feet to the left of the entrance. There was a shadow inside. It was Bigfoot. What it was doing there was systematic, not a frenzy, not the scattered chaos a predator in a confined space usually produces. Bigfoot was moving through the coop, picking up laying hens with both hands, breaking their necks with a single quick twist, and dropping the bodies. He moved from one hen to the other, and there were 60 hens in that coop. It had been in there for less than 5 minutes by our estimate, and had already worked through a significant portion of them. At least 10 were dead, some without their heads. I raised my gun and fired at center mass from approximately 80 yards. The shot hit, and I know it did because of what happened next, and because of the blood we found there afterward. I was aiming for Bigfoot's upper chest, which was the largest available target. The impact registered on his body. A visible flinch, a half step back. But what followed was the response of an angry beast. Bigfoot turned to us. He roared, not the sustained territorial sound from the pasture. This was shorter, sharper, and was directed outward. Bigfoot was coming for us. I had to take down some things about this night just so this video doesn't get taken down by YouTube, but there are some hidden details about my encounter with Bigfoot that are very, very disturbing. But don't worry, I attached all of it in a file down below. Check the description at your own risk. Anyway, as soon as I saw Bigfoot racing towards us, I ran. Even though there were 80 yards between me and the barn, Bigfoot covered. Half of it in the time it took me to cover mine. Luckily, Tom and his son split off toward their truck. I made it to the barn door and shut it behind me with the rifle up and my back against the wood. Bigfoot smashed the door just seconds after I closed it. But something worse happened. Bigfoot grabbed the door frame from the outside and pulled, took hold of the structural frame the door was set into, and applied force outward, away from the barn wall. I heard the support beams inside the wall give way, one after another, with a sequence of sharp cracks as the connection between the door frame and the barn's front wall failed. The frame came away from the wall, and part of the front section folded inward. A large gap suddenly opened to the night where the solid wall had been 2 seconds earlier. Bigfoot didn't enter through the gap, though. Instead, he moved along the exterior, grabbing boards and pulling them outward. Each pull took a section of the front wall siding with it. Some boards splintered, some came away in longer pieces, and some took framing nails with them as they went. It was pulling the barn apart from the outside, moving laterally across the front face, board by board. Bigfoot was destroying everything. I went out the back door and ran for the house. Behind me, the demolition continued. 2 roof sections came down while I was running. I could hear the crash of interior beams hitting the floor, the sound of corrugated roof panels coming off their supports. By the time I reached the house and looked back through the window, the front third of the barn structure was open, and Bigfoot was still working along the remaining wall section, still pulling. At 11:03 p.m., Bigfoot left the barn and moved back to the cattle pasture. There were 3 young steers in the near section of the pasture, each between 600 and 800 pounds. I watched from the house window. Bigfoot was on a crazy rampage. The first steer didn't make it 10 yards before Bigfoot caught it by the neck and put it down with the same efficiency it had used on the calf. The movement took maybe 2 seconds from contact to the animal being on the ground. I have watched livestock die from predator attacks, even from bears and tigers, but none of them looked like that. The speed was one thing, the precision was another, and there was a lot of blood. The second steer had a better angle and got more distance across the field before Bigfoot closed the gap. Even with how fast it was, this wasn't a chase that lasted more than a few seconds. Soon, Bigfoot had the animal's hind legs, pulled it down, and stomped on the skull. The steer did not move after that. The third steer made it the farthest. I watched it reach the far side of the pasture, the full 300 yards of open ground, before Bigfoot caught it. But what happened next really caught me off guard. Bigfoot grabbed the animal around the torso, a 730-pound steer, and lifted it completely off the ground. PD carried it approximately 30 feet of open pasture while the animal was still struggling, hooves off the ground. Then Bigfoot threw it into the fence line. The fence posts on that section were treated 6x6 timber. 6 of them snapped. The last steer died on impact. Even with the rifle in my hand, I couldn't do anything. I just provoked Bigfoot, and I had to bear the consequences. Just then, Bigfoot moved to the equipment shed. My shed housed 2 tractors, my ATV, and a full set of farm implements, along with tool storage. The rolling door on the front is an industrial gauge mounted on a heavy-duty overhead track. Even with the weight, I had just one question in mind. Could Bigfoot break in? Bigfoot grabbed the bottom of the door and hanked it upward off its track in one motion. The track produced a sound that carried clearly across the property, even from the house. Then, Bigfoot went inside. What I heard over the next several minutes, the crash of the ATV overturning on the concrete floor. The progressive sound of metal shelving units pulling down and hitting the floor in sequence, one after another, spaced by about 4 seconds each as it worked its way along the wall. Individual tools scattering, the high metallic ring of wrenches and sockets hitting concrete, and 2 separate heavy impacts I couldn't immediately identify. I identified them the next morning. Both were from the tractor's front loader assembly, struck hard enough to crack the metal housing in 2 places. A front loader assembly on that model weighs approximately 800 pounds and is not a component that cracks from incidental contact. The shed went quiet for about 30 seconds. Then Bigfoot came back out. It was carrying one of my 55-gallon diesel drums. Full, that drum weighs close to 400 pounds. It was carrying it overhead in both hands, moving with it across the open ground toward the smaller barn. And the way it moved with that weight was the same deliberate, unhurried pace it had used all night, not straining and not adjusting its gait to compensate for the load. Moving with 400 pounds overhead, the way you'd carry something you weren't bothering to think about. It threw the drum, 20 feet of open ground between where it was standing and the barn's near wall, and the drum went through the siding and into the interior space beyond it. The diesel soaked into the barn floor and ran down through the boards. By some specific luck I still think about, nothing ignited. If it had, that night would have ended differently in ways I don't want to calculate. At 11:26 p.m., Bigfoot went back to the chicken coops. There are 3 coops on my property. The largest was the one it had already hit. The second and third were smaller wooden structures on the south side of the barn complex, 20 hens each. Solid construction, but not designed to stop what was out there. It went through all 3. The methodology on the second and third was faster than the first. No digger ripping this time, just the wall. Bigfoot put both hands on the near wall of each structure and pushed inward, collapsing the frame in a single motion, then worked through the interior. Some birds got out into the dark, most didn't. In less than 10 minutes, it killed everything it could catch across all 3 coops. The count the next morning was 51 chickens dead. Some of those I had raised from chicks. Tom and his sons had repositioned the truck toward the driveway by then, headlights on, filming on their phones. Bigfoot saw the headlights. It charged the truck from about 100 yards. Tom told me later that the speedometer was at 35 miles per hour before they hit the paved road. Bigfoot ran approximately 50 yards in pursuit before stopping, and by Tom's account from the rearview mirror, it was not the truck getting far enough away. What stopped it was a decision. It pulled up at a specific point, planted, and stood there while the truck continued accelerating away. It stood in my driveway and roared for nearly 6 seconds. I heard it from inside the house with the windows shut. The sound was different from the ones earlier in the night, longer, louder, with a quality I can only call declarative. Not a threat aimed at something specific, not the sharp, directed roar it had produced when I shot it. Something broader than that. The sound moved across the whole property and into the surrounding forest, and I could hear it settling into the dark after it ended, the way a sound that large takes a moment to leave a space fully. Then it stood there, chest working, blood visible on the right shoulder from where the rifle shot had hit, surrounded by 90 minutes of work. The barn is partially open, the coop's flat, 3 steers dead in the pasture, my ATV overturned in the equipment shed, a diesel drum through the wall of the smaller barn, and Bigfoot standing in the middle of my driveway in the dark, not moving, not looking at any of it. Then Bigfoot turned back toward the pasture. I thought it was leaving. I was wrong. It walked back through the field slowly, not at the pace it had used during the kills, but something slower and more deliberate, the way you walk through a space when you're looking at it rather than moving through it. It stopped near the first steer it had killed and stood there for close to 30 seconds, not feeding, not doing anything I had a category for, just standing over the dead animal in the dark, the way you stand over something when you're making a decision about it. Then it moved to the fence line where the third steer had gone through. It stopped at the gap, looked at the broken posts, and grabbed one of the remaining upright posts with both hands. It didn't pull it down, it just held it for a moment, and then it let go and kept walking toward the eastern edge of the pasture. I was watching all of this from the house window with the rifle in my hands and no clear idea of what I was watching. The rampage had a shape to it when it was happening. Livestock, barn, shed, coops, truck, but this was different. Bigfoot moving slowly through the pasture in the dark, stopping at things, not destroying them, not eating anything. It looked like something taking stock. At the eastern tree line, it stopped again, and for the second time that night, it turned back and looked at the ranch. This time the pause was longer than the first, not 10 seconds, closer to 20 or 25. I stood at the window and I did not move, and I did not lower the rifle, and I watched Bigfoot stand at the edge of my property and look back at everything it had done. There was a specific quality to those 20 seconds that I haven't been able to put clean language around in the years since. It wasn't the stillness of an animal that had stopped to rest or to listen. It was the stillness of something that was present in a different way than it had been during the previous 90 minutes, the whole night. It had been in motion, and in motion with a purpose, but standing at that tree line in the dark, looking back at the ranch, it was something else, something that registered what it was looking at. Then it stepped into the trees and was gone. Tom and his son stayed until sunrise. We didn't go into the tree line that night. There are decisions you make in those hours before dawn that you don't explain to people who haven't been in them. Practical decisions based on what you've just watched for 90 minutes. None of us said much. Tom's older son sat in the truck with the engine running and the headlights pointed at the tree line the whole time. Not because it would have helped, but because doing something felt better than doing nothing. Tom himself walked the driveway perimeter twice with a flashlight, checking the ground, not saying what he was looking for. His younger son stayed close to the house with me. We listened to the forest for sounds that never came, whatever had been in. Those trees all night had gone quiet, and the quiet was worse than the noise had been, because at least when there was noise, you knew where it was. At first light, I walked the property. The main barn's front wall was gone from the left corner to approximately 2/3 of the way across. The frame was exposed, and 2 roof sections had collapsed into the interior, taking a workbench and most of the tool storage on the near wall down with them. The smaller barn had a 2-foot breach from the diesel drum, with fuel still seeping into the floorboards when I got there. The smell of it carried across the whole yard. The 3 dead steers were where they had fallen. The first 2 were close together in the near section of the pasture. The third was at the fence line. The posts around it splintered and splayed outward from the impact. I stood next to that steer for a while. It was a 730-pound animal, and it had been carried 30 feet off the ground before it was thrown. I have been a rancher for over 20 years, and I could not have told you before that night that anything was capable of that. The footprints in the soft ground near the eastern fence were the clearest physical record of everything. I measured several of them before the morning dew softened the edges. 18 inches long, 5-toed, full heel impression. The stride spacing ran close to 60 inches. I photographed every one I could find, and I documented the drag mark from the calf, which was still visible running from the center of the pasture to the tree line, a wide compressed channel in the grass that the overnight damp hadn't closed over yet. I stood at the tree line for a long time, not going in, just standing at the edge of it, looking at where the drag mark ended and the forest started, thinking about the 200 yards of dark between that point and where we had found the calf the night before. The blood by the chicken coop had pooled on the ground near where Bigfoot was standing when I fired. Dark red, almost brown, which I noted at the time. I collected it with what I had on hand and sent it to a small independent lab that a wildlife contact had recommended. The results took 6 weeks. The DNA analysis came back as a primate, not bear, not any known predator species, not human. The sample showed primate markers that didn't correspond to any catalog species in the databases the lab used. The technician who processed it called me directly after the results came in and asked where the sample had come from. I told him about a predator attack on my property. He asked what species. I told him I didn't know. He told me the sample was going into a separate file and that if I had more material, I should send it. I never followed up on that call. I've thought about why, and the honest answer is that I wasn't sure what following up would produce that I was ready to deal with. The 25 seconds at the tree line after Bigfoot had walked back through the pasture, after it had stood over the dead steer, after it had held that fence post and let it go. That second look was longer than the first, and it happened after everything was already finished. There was no functional reason for it. The night was over, and my ranch had been torn apart. I was in the house, and Tom was in the driveway, and neither of us was a threat anymore. And Bigfoot stood at the edge of that tree line for 25 seconds and looked back anyway. I don't know what that means. I know it happened, and I know that something capable of carrying a 730-pound steer and throwing it through a fence is also capable of standing at a tree line for 25 seconds and looking back at a ranch in the dark for reasons I cannot explain using anything I know about animal behavior. In total, Bigfoot killed 51 chickens, 3 steers, and 1 calf. It caused $85,000 in structural damage and left a set of DNA results sitting in a file at an independent lab. Whatever walked out of my tree line that night, it came back. Not that night, not for several months, but it came back. And that's a different story. A few weeks before the attack on my farm, I read a news report that Big had attacked one Dale Mercerfoot. However, the Bigfoot that attacked me was not the same. That raises 3 strange questions. How many Bigfoots are in America? How many Bigfoots are on Earth? And most importantly, is Bigfoot the only mythical creature in existence?